also thrilled, and you are in for a treat. Doug Miller, he's from Pennsbury Manor. I do have a slide with all your information. I'll get to it later. But I just wanted to give you a big shout out right now. You're just in for a really good treat with Doug. So I can't wait for him to get started. But we're celebrating America 250, and this is America 52. 250PA. So Winners Heritage House is a nonprofit affiliate with America 250PA, and we get our logo on their website, and then we can share things that we do when we have the time. But anyway, we have a series. This is our speaker series every Wednesday from 1 to 2:30. We have flyers if you want to see who our other speakers are. And I think that's all I'll say right now, okay? But I think we're going to our first, okay. So, sorry, Doug, I didn't memorize.
Oh, that's all right. Yeah.
But Doug Miller has been involved in public history for nearly 40 years. He has served as the museum director of Curtin Village in Center County, Hope Lodge and Graham Park historic sites in Montgomery County, Brandywine Battlefield Park in Delaware and Chester counties, and Washington's Crossing historic site in Bucks County. Mr. Miller currently serves as the director of William Penn's home, Pennsbury Manor, which is also located in Bucks County. He's the chair of the Bucks County's Tourism Board and serves in Broad Museum Field as a peer reviewer in the Museum Accreditation Program. So, highly qualified. Yeah, thank you. That's my sister. Anyway, without further ado, okay, did you have?
I have a lapel mic. Can everyone hear me? Yeah. All right. First off, thank you for coming out. Second, thank you for supporting history. It's, I've made my professional career as a historian. And without people who support it, without people who are interested, I wouldn't have a job. But I do feel it's relevant to our lives today. And for the front row, 50 years ago, I was 12 years old for the bicentennial. And I was sitting in your chairs, listening to the historians and so on, and learning about the revolution and the 200th anniversary of the founding of the country. As a trained historian, I have a pathological fear of technology. So we'll see if I can master the PowerPoint or not. Yep. So we're here to talk about William Penn. And I always like to start actually early in his life. Actually, 2 generations back. William Penn's grandfather is a diplomat eventually. He starts out as a merchant. He's going from London to North Africa to buy stuff for his business, and Barbary pirates kidnap 200 English citizens, and they're holding them for ransom. Well, Giles Penn helps negotiate their safe release. For that, the King of England at the time, Charles I, awards him a diplomatic posting. I bring that up because that's the point of intersection between the Penn family and the crown. Well, Giles was a fair diplomat, a fair businessman, but he really wasn't a rich man. So, he has a son named William Penn. This would be our William Penn's father. If you don't have enough money to send your kid to school, you put him in the military. So Giles Penn actually buys a captaincy in the Royal Navy for his son, William Penn. William Penn Sr., our William Penn's father, is a tremendous sailor. And off the coast of Ireland, he distinguishes himself in battle. Within a year of that, is raised to the rank of admiral, meets a beautiful Dutch expatriate whom he courts and weds, and their firstborn son picks up the name William Penn, our William Penn. Well, the great thing about being an admiral in the Royal Navy is if Admiral Penn's fleet captures enemy shipping, we as a crew get 1/3 of the take. The admiral gets to keep 1/3 of the take, and the King of England gets 1/3 of the take. So it allowed the admiral to build up quite a war chest. So he wants his son to have the best. Sends him off for education. The first place he ends up in elementary school is called Chigwell. While he's there, he has 2 life-altering events. He actually believes God has spoken to him directly. He's a very spiritual young man. And he has a near-death experience. He contracts smallpox. Should have been a death sentence at that time, but daddy's rich. You can have the best treatment available, which was mercury. They gave raw mercury to this kid. It actually kills off smallpox, but also a lot of his hair follicles. So at age 11, young William Penn develops early pattern baldness, something I can sympathize with. And from Chigwell, Dad sends him off to the best college available, Oxford. Within 1 year, Admiral Penn gets a note from the faculty. Your son is a pain in the butt. We don't want him here. He's not Oxford material. Take him home. So, Daddy's kind of scratching his head. What do I do with this kid? Decides to send him to a Huguenot academy in Saumur, France. Portions of what we would know as France today actually were held by the English at that time. For 2 years after attending this Huguenot academy, by the way, Huguenots as a religious group are being heavily prosecuted in France at this time, and they're big proponents of something called religious toleration. Young Penn gets to tour Europe on Daddy's dime for 2 years. He's entertained by the King of France. By this point, Admiral Penn has been knighted. He is a member of aristocracy, so it's very fitting that his son would call on the court of Louis. Young William is not a Quaker yet. He's been raised in Church of England and he's being groomed to go into the military. He actually gets into a duel, a sword fight, while he's in France, while in Paris. And he'll write about that later in his life. So, while all this is going on in young William's life, a civil war breaks out in England. The King of England is Charles I. His opposition is Oliver Cromwell. Oliver Cromwell is a staunch Puritan. He feels that England has lost its way. He wants stronger Puritan values. He wants rid of a king and a strong parliament. The king, of course, tells everyone, God made me king and you people should do what I say. And they go to war over it. Ultimately, the king loses. He doesn't just lose the war, they chop his head off. So he's beheaded. Oliver Cromwell actually gets to take over England. He names himself Lord Protector of England, which I always thought that was kind of a cool title. I'd like that on my business card. I could be the Lord Protector of Pennsbury Manor. So Cromwell runs the country for about a decade. Ultimately, he will pass. While this stuff is all unfolding, Admiral Penn is fighting for England, but not in the Civil War, against foreign enemies. He's in the Navy. Partway through a campaign he's involved in, Parliament cuts off military spending. Or as I like to say it, the legislative branch is not playing nicely with the executive branch. Does that sound familiar somewhat? So the admiral takes money out of his own war chest to keep the campaign going. He pays to feed 2,000 troops and pay their wages that are under his command. That debt will play into our story a little bit later. Cromwell passes. The English people were aghast that you would behead a king. They like having a stronger parliament, but they want a king back. Before the guy lost his head, Charles I actually had 2 sons, and they have been hiding in plain sight in Brittany, which again, we would think of as part of France, but at that point it was held by the English. So they pick 11 prominent citizens to cross the English Channel and sit down with the 2 sons of Charles I. So Admiral Penn's fleet is... Are you hungry? Okay, just checking. I thought, there's snacks over here. Admiral Penn's fleet is what carries that entourage. The admiral himself is one of those 11 prominent citizens chosen to sit down and negotiate with Charles II, the son, and his kid brother James. So Penn heads off in his ship with his dad. They sit down with Charles II and say, hey, if you come back, we'll make you king, and we promise not to cut your head off like your father's. Charles agrees. They bring him back into London. It is a glorious homecoming, over-the-top opulent, the antithesis of how Spartan things were under Oliver Cromwell. Shortly thereafter, a war breaks out between the English and the Dutch. Admiral Penn is the best sailor in the Royal Navy. He's the third highest guy. He's a high admiral at this point. So they outfit a fleet under the admiral. The head of the Royal Navy gets onto the admiral's ship, and they sail off to do battle against the Dutch. In a sweeping sea battle off the coast of Holland, the English soundly defeat the Dutch. It's called the Battle of Lowencroft. And when the English fleet sails back into London, there's all sorts of accolades. And when everyone wants to lay the laurels at the feet of Admiral Penn, he takes 2 steps back. He says, it wasn't about me. It was the head of the Royal Navy who was telling me everything to do. Until people start to criticize him and say, well, why didn't you follow up? You had them crippled. Why didn't you sink every ship that they had? At that point, the admiral steps forward. He says, that was my call. I had wounded, I had damaged ships. We needed to withdraw and refit, protecting the head of the Royal Navy, who happens to be the kid brother of the king. It's James. Well, the Dutch have holdings over here in the New World. It was called New Amsterdam. Since they lost the war, James gets to take over, and he rebrands New Amsterdam after himself. And you won't see the connection till I tell you James's title. He's the Duke of York. Thus we get New York. And New York at that time extended the whole way down until it bumps into those people in Maryland, the Calverts. All this stuff goes on. Young Penn gets, after serving at Lowencroft with his father, gets to go to Lincoln's and study law. A year later, something that will influence Penn's future life in his city planning, the Black Death. London has plague running through it. How many of you people thought you'd live through a pandemic? Me neither. My grandmother actually was a nurse, came into nursing in 1918, right after the end of the war. So she was around for the influenza epidemic of 1919. And I never asked her about it, never thinking that I would go through a pandemic too. Well, one way to get rid of the Black Death is to burn everything. It wasn't on purpose, but London actually catches on fire. All the wooden buildings were side by side, and about 2/3 of London will burn to the ground. For some of us here that remember the 20th century, it would be similar to the fire bombings of Dresden and Tokyo in scope for those people back then. William Penn is at home with his dad. If you guys could save one thing from fire, what would it be? Any ideas? The dog? My daughter had the same response. Our dog is Chase. So the dog, family pictures, wedding albums, stuff like that. Bible. Anyone want to take a guess for the Penns?
Charters.
The wine. The admiral and his son go into the backyard and dig a great big hole to bury all the wine. And the reason we know this is Admiral Penn's next door neighbor was a diarist named Samuel Pepys. And he recorded everything, including these 2 guys going out back, digging a great big hole really fast to bury the wine so it won't get burned up. It did, yeah. So, young William is going to have an experience after this. Daddy has estates in Ireland. They've been there before. When you're a high admiral, the crown, the king awards you. If you want a good example why the Irish don't like the English, you have an Irish nobleman who has his own castle who gets booted out just to give that castle to an admiral in the Royal Navy. At the time of the plague, the Penns actually were there in residence to get away from the plague, but they saw the outcome. And there's a mutiny that goes on among troops in Ireland. Young William Penn volunteers to be a lieutenant and goes off and actually sees battle action at a place called Carrickfergus. How many of you guys knew that William Penn the Quaker was a combat veteran? Okay, we got one. So, while in Ireland, young William is a sharp dresser, such as myself, and he goes to a clothier. That clothier is a Quaker. And he's telling a story about running into this very charismatic Quaker orator named Thomas Lowe. And that Quaker clothier, tailor, basically says, Thomas Lowe is speaking about 3 towns away. Penn hops on his horse, goes there, listens to Lowe, and within a year, he makes his life conversion from being Church of England to a Quaker. It broke his dad's heart. His father will cane him, throw him out of the house, they'll reconcile, but it really damages their relationship as father and son. As a young Quaker, he goes through all sorts of things. He will be jailed a number of times. I was wanted for our gift shop to get a temporary tattoo of a little teardrop, like the prison tattoos that they have with Penn in it. We haven't managed that yet. But he'll spend time in the Tower of London. One of the trials that he's involved in actually influences our judicial system. The nickname is a hat trial. The official name was the Penn-Mead trial. Penn and a fellow Quaker named Mead are kind of set up. At that time, you have to show deference to social superiors. You have to bow lower than them. You have to remove your hat. And a key precept of being a Quaker is everyone is spiritually equal. And God can speak to you directly. Everyone has the inner light, and God can contact you directly, which undermines organized religion. All of a sudden, you don't have to go through a priest or a pastor anymore. You can speak to God directly and follow God's will. So, Penn and his cohort, Mead, do not show the adequate amount of social deference, and they're jailed. Penn, remember, he studied law at Lincoln's College. He argues the case himself, and the jury all says not guilty. And the judge steps up, he goes, okay, jury, you're wrong. They're guilty of sin, and I find you, the jury, in contempt. So I'm throwing you in jail too. And the public outcry was fast and harsh, and that judge had to backpedal really quickly. It's the first time in English common law where the will of the jury supersedes the will of the judge. This will play into how Penn sets up his legal system. Penn-Mead trial, we just went over that. We talked about Penn's daddy, the admiral. The admiral will eventually pass. When the admiral passes, young William gets the title and he gets all the money. So you'll find that young Penn is helping 2 Quakers with a disagreement. They're in London at this time. It's the early 1670s. That disagreement is how they are going to run their investment in the new world called West Jersey. Young William Penn takes some of his money and buys in, and he'll be one of the proprietary interests of West Jersey before there is a Pennsylvania colony. He actually writes some of the founding legislation for it and is able to use his legal training to help give structure to this Quaker enclave of West Jersey. New Jersey at that time was east and west. West Jersey would be the part butted up against the Delaware River. So here's some of the players we were talking about. The upper right hand, Oliver Cromwell, who was the Lord Protector of England. You've got James below him, the Duke of York, kid brother of the new king. You've got Louis, the King of France, who entertained young William. The Admiral above, his son William below. And King William III will play into our story in just a little bit. So this is a family coat of arms. You'll actually see in the upper right-hand side a plaque that hangs in a church in Wales. That's Admiral Penn's battle armor hanging above it. So the Admiral's armor from when he was in combat in the Royal Navy still survives. A huge influence on a new Quaker was George Fox, the founder of the Quaker faith. And I need to give a shout out to him. At age 19, he had loving parents who raised him in a Puritan home, but they encouraged him to get education and encouraged his inquisitive nature. So at age 19, he goes on this kind of spiritual journey, visiting other church services, really kind of walking around England. Some he's shunned at, others he's welcomed in. But along the way, he discovers this idea of the inner light. And I always say that George Fox, who's the founder of the Quaker faith, is kind of an accidental leader. He didn't set out to found a new faith, but he did. Ultimately, when Fox later in life will take a bride who was a widow named Margaret Fell, William Penn signs the wedding certificate. It's kind of like being the best man. That's how close a relationship those two had. When Penn takes his first bride, Gulielma Springett, Fox is there. And shortly thereafter, Penn and Fox go off to proselytize in the German-speaking countries for almost 2 years, leaving their brides at home. In English Quakerism, they look at Margaret Fell as a co-founder of the Quaker faith with George Fox. So I mentioned Gulielma. I always tease my college interns. She was the Victoria's Secret model of the 17th century. She was legendary for her beauty. Her parents were first-generation Quakers. She was a Quaker as well. And they will have 8 children, only 4 of whom will survive into adulthood. Penn, as a new Quaker, is a firebrand. So he is actively pamphleting and writing. And I always found this kind of dichotomy in Penn. There's a quote from a book that he wrote called Some Fruits of Solitude, which essentially he writes this when he's in the Tower of London later in life and in lockup, and he's got some spare time on his head. So these are all his life's axioms. And he says, have few books, but choose them wisely. Yet this guy writes over 20 books. So he has experience in planning in West Jersey. He never actually comes over yet, but 5 years after helping those guys negotiate things, all the Quaker investors still can't come to consensus on how they're going to run this colony. And Penn is starting to look around, and he sees these people in Maryland, the Calvert family. And Maryland is a family-owned colony established in 1634 under the reign of Charles I. And it's established as an enclave for Catholicism. When established, it had religious toleration. However, and I did a consultancy for them. I went down to their founding point, St. Mary's City, and I proudly told them it only counts if you didn't rescind it in the 1660s, which they did. We talked about Penn's travels with Fox. I think that really deepened his commitment to the faith and laid some groundwork. Those travels and the travels when he was a student, going across Europe And being a Quaker himself and having lived with Huguenots, he sees that there are these other religions that are being oppressed in Europe. At that time in England, if we are all members of Quaker meeting, we would have to pay a tithe or a tax to worship as we choose. If you worshiped outside of Church of England, you had to pay a tax. And we were banned from having our own meeting house. That would not come until 1688. At that point, people were meeting in people's homes. There is a story early after Penn's conversion to Quakerism. They're meeting in somebody's home in London. They're on the second floor, and soldiers show up to break up the meeting. Young William jumps up, he beats the stuffing out of one of these guys and throws him down the stairs. And everyone else in the meeting is aghast, because as Quakers, you're supposed to be pacifists. Not to defend his actions, but remember who was trained as a soldier, raised in a military family. And there was probably muscle memory with that guy. I got to defend my friends. Privately, he's dressed down about this afterwards, and we believe that's the last time he ever raised his hand to another person. So, Penn's finances. He's got a lot of money from Daddy. We're not sure about a dowry from Guglielmo's family, but it would make sense at that time. He owns the estates in Ireland now. He has investments and owns land in West Jersey. He is spending, this is probably a Royal Navy term, like a drunken sailor, because he's never really had to earn his own money, and he's actually not a good money manager. But he's fed up with this West Jersey try. So he petitions the crown in 1680 to have his own colony. And ultimately, the negotiations go on for over a year. If you guys visit Pennsbury within the next 2 weeks, we have the original draft of the charter written in 1680, not the finished product, the first cut, along with a letter from Whitehall talking about this from English government on exhibit. It belongs to the state, it belongs to all of us, it's kept in the archives, and it probably won't see the light of day for another quite a few years. The actual charter is exhibited in the state archives for 1 week, the first week of March. So these negotiations go on. Ultimately, they come to an agreement. The Crown has asked William Penn, "What will you call your colony?" William Penn proudly stands up and says, "New Wales." Charles II had an advisor from Wales who absolutely hated the Penn family. And the guy's like, "Don't do it, it's a bad idea." So Charles says, "Yeah, I'm not hot on the Wales thing, give me an alternative." Penn, who had studied languages, says Sylvania, or in Latin, woodlands. King Charles responds, "My family, the crown, our country, England, owes a debt to your father that we can never fully repay. So we're going to name the colony Pennsylvania in his honor." The negotiations were to eradicate the debt owed to Admiral Penn for keeping that campaign going. I think this is one of the best examples of a guy taking a sword and beating it into a plowshare that you're ever going to find, because the holy experiment of Pennsylvania is named for a military war hero and based on a military debt. Yet it's set up as this experiment of religious toleration here. It happens in March 1681. Penn will sit down and write a letter to his best friend, Robert Turner. That's how I know that story of the naming. And there's a tagline in the, well, two that historians always point out. One is, William Penn says, "Everyone's going to think it's a vanity on my part." How many of you guys thought that Pennsylvania was named for the Quaker guy? I think many people think it's named for the Quaker guy. It's actually named for his dad, Admiral Sir William Penn. And Penn will say, everyone's going to think I named it after myself and I'm being vain. He also puts into this letter that he never thought anyone else was going to see. He says, may God bless it and make it the seat of a nation. And I would suggest as we look back at 1776, it was his city that independence was declared in. It was his city that the Constitution that we're still operating under was done in. So I think prophetically, the guy was right. So we talked about West Jersey. If you want to have a place in Pennsylvania government at the outset, you needed to own land. In England at that time, in order to vote for Parliament, you had to be a landholder. And not just any land, you had to hold huge tracts of land. There's a law that goes back to the Middle Ages. It's called the Knights of the Shire Act. And this established who could vote for Parliament. Through Penn's time, the whole way up to the American Revolution, only 3% of the English population could vote for Parliament. Penn has set it up that if you owned 50 acres of land, you got to vote. So, you're going to build a colony, and you're starting from ground zero. What do you do? He's been looking at other colonies, taking inspiration from them. One of the greatest political thinkers of the 17th century is a guy named John Locke. Penn didn't just know this guy, he really knew him. One of the times when Penn is jailed, as soon as he gets out of jail, John Locke jumps to his defense and tries to help restore his good name in England. When Locke is accused of crimes, Penn will be the guy that defends him. They had a relationship as friends, not just Penn reading this stuff. So, this is a map that shows where his dream home will ultimately end up. It's right where the river Delaware turns, just below Trenton. Or when people ask me where was Penn's home, think of the elbow that sticks into the side of New Jersey. That's where it is, right where the river turns. And I've had a lot of people say, well, why didn't he build in Philadelphia? Fairly simple. In 1681, Philadelphia didn't exist. It was a vision in his mind. But West Jersey had already started to develop. Almost across the river, just a little bit downstream, was the town of Burlington. It was an established market town, and it's where the yearly meeting of Friends, Quaker meetings, was held. A yearly meeting is where each individual meeting sends representatives to go to discuss issues of the faith. So when I talk to school kids at Pennsbury, I say, well, he built here because the Wawa is just down the road, which the road was the river, and that's where his church was at. So, solicitation of settlers. Penn was a linguist. He will write in 5 different languages trying to encourage people to come to Pennsylvania. And he wasn't just encouraging Quakers. He realized that there were these people that were being repressed in their home countries. Now, this is tongue-in-cheek job, but I always say it's all the whack jobs of Europe. My ancestors were Swiss Mennonites. We were very high on the whack job scale back then. They didn't fit in their own countries. They were being repressed. He offered them safe space. And in many of their countries, they couldn't be landholders because the land was held by the aristocracy. Come to Pennsylvania, you can have your own land, you can worship as you choose. And it was a brilliant marketing thing. With religion, freedom of conscience. Remember how we discussed in England you had to pay a tithe or a tax to worship? You had to pay a tax if you were intolerant in Penn's colony. Not to worship, but if you were found to be intolerant, you were taxed. His first frame of government sets up that religious liberty, and you'll see the part, intolerance is unlawful. The assembly, the General Assembly, will take the laws to the people. To say that they actually made the laws, a lot of times it's the governor on top, the assembly, and then the populace. So the governor will come up with the ideas, press it down to the assembly, and it'll go out to the people. And there'll be a penal system set up that for the first time, the idea is to reform people, not just punish them. He will establish a great relationship with the Native Americans. Are there faults? Are there flaws? Absolutely. They can be documented. But he sets out a policy of buying the land from the Native Americans first, and then he's selling it at a markup to these Europeans. He has a guy start to do the surveys, divvy up the land so he can sell it to new settlers, and he's inviting everyone to come here. There are accounts that were published in the 1680s and widely distributed. He's marketing about this place. For 100 pounds sterling, you could buy 5,000 acres. That first year, there's this guy named Thomas Callahill. He is a linen merchant in Bristol, England. He buys, sight unseen, 5,000 acres. Today, there's a Callahill Street in Philadelphia, and he'll play into our story in a little bit. Penn offers bonus lots for the first few years. So, ladies, if you wanted to come to Pennsylvania, but you couldn't afford ship's passage, you might indenture yourself. You might have a skill set that's useful. You might be a cook, you might be a seamstress. That indenture, what you do is you actually sell years of your labor to a ship's captain. When that ship's captain makes port here, he will sell you to one of the landholders. And for 5 to 7 years, you would have to labor for that guy that bought you. But that's how you got your passage over here. When you finished, William Penn set it up that you got a bonus lot, and you were allotted those 50 acres, so you have a say-so in government. And he did it inland. It was really smart because he's moving the population inland, and not just any population, those that have skills to help build a colony. The first purchase of land from the Lenape people is brokered by Penn's cousin. Penn's cousin is his advance man. Penn has young kids at home and a wife. He's writing out all the governmental stuff, but he will write letters of introduction in 5 different languages, send Markham over. Markham will put in on the Pennsylvania side of the river at Morrisville. That is the furthest you could navigate. It's actually now known as Falls Township for the fault line, the geological fault line that creates, not really falls, but kind of rapids in the Delaware River between Trenton and Morrisville. So Markham actually will buy the land that Pennsbury Manor sits on from the Native Americans. It wasn't a cash sale because there was nowhere for Lenape people to go and spend cash. It was in trade goods. And the ultimate amount of trade goods was 2,164 pounds. The debt that was owed to Admiral Penn, that the colony is founded on, was 16,000 pounds sterling. So Penn lays out 1/8 of the total purchase price of the whole colony. He's being encouraged to do this by the king because there had been wars between native peoples and colonists predating Penn, and the king doesn't want to see any more of that. Penn's land grant from England takes him 4 longitudinal lines inland from the Delaware River. The Lenape don't know this. They don't care. This is their homeland, but they have been ravaged by European diseases. They have been in contact with white settlers for about 60 years prior to Penn. So they understand land ownership, and they grant him tracts at different points. There's a legend that Penn was fluent in Native American language. As a historian, I know about this guy, Lassie Cook. He was a Swede, and Penn is paying him to be an interpreter. And I'm like, if the guy's fluent, why does he need an interpreter? I think he probably knew enough to say, where's the bathroom and may I have seconds? But Penn will meet with them face to face, and he'll go to where they're at. One of my favorite young first visit stories is Penn's down along the Schuylkill, and he hooks up with two Native American guides, hops in a dugout canoe, and they paddle up the Schuylkill almost the whole way to Reading. And there's actually a stone obelisk along 422 that is reputedly the furthest west that Penn goes. But remember, he was trained as a soldier. He was a very fit young man. He was somebody who, it appears, could meet with a sachem or Native American chief, just the same as he could be entertained by the court of Louis. But he was comfortable on a big ship or a canoe. So he has these treaty agreements with the Native Americans. It will be his sons who break the faith with the Lenape people. And in the 20 years after Penn has passed, there will be the infamous walking purchase. That is how far a person could walk in a day and a half. The Penns, actually, the sons, bought a large tract of land, fair and square, same way before. Everyone was fine with it, but they want more. There's been a population explosion, and the Penn family is land rich and cash poor. They want more cash. So, essentially, the eldest son comes from England because these negotiations have been failing for almost 2 years. They think he'll be great. He'll be just like his dad. He's representing the family interests. And all of a sudden, a governmental deed shows up. It's a copy, not the original, that dates back to William Penn's lifespan, saying that Penn had already bought this land. They just hadn't measured it out. Every signatory on this copy is dead. Nobody can attest to it really being legit or not. And today, most historians feel it was a land grab. Penn's agent, a guy named James Logan, has arranged to hire the equivalent of Olympic sprinters. He's cut a path, or had cut a path, through the wilderness for these runners to go on. The Lenape are thinking, you're going to go due north and then cut a 45-degree angle into the Delaware River. Logan's path goes northwest. And at the ending point, that 45-degree angle becomes far more severe. One runner will run from just west of Washington's Crossing today at a place called the Wrightstown Meeting. It was a Quaker meeting. It sits on Route 413, almost 65 miles up to Jim Thorpe. That was the ending point. And it displaces the Lenape, and sadly for them, it's the beginning of what they will term the forced removals. Today, federally, we recognize 3 branches of Lenape people: the Delaware Tribe of Indians, the Delaware Nation. They're both in Oklahoma today, and they faced 8 forced removals at the hands of government, whether it was colonial government or US government, to where they've landed today. If you want to hear their story, tribal members from Oklahoma will be at Pennsbury on May the 3rd. It's a Sunday afternoon, and I will guarantee you a great program. Penn wouldn't have believed in atheism. He was actually tolerant at the point of his second visit of having Jews come in. Maryland had already established themselves as tolerant, but they had rescinded that, so there wasn't new immigration. There will actually be a backlash against Catholicism in England after Charles I passes. His kid brother James takes the throne. James, remember the Duke of York, now becomes king, and he's out of the closet Catholic. He's like, of course I'm Catholic. You know, I grew up in France. So the son-in-law of James will actually start to raise armies against him. James remembers how his dad was beheaded. James advocates. And William of Orange and the king's daughter, Mary, will take over. That was a picture of William III. So we get the William and Mary period. Penn will be accused of treason and thrown in the Tower of London because of his close relationship with James. Treason is a death sentence. When asked to renounce James, Penn will say, James was my friend at his zenith, at his height. He will be my friend in his desolation. Penn will not turn on him. Penn again successfully argues the case, but he will have the colony taken from him, and he will be jailed for almost 2 years. Most of it's house arrest. But it's kind of a dark period for historians. We don't have a whole lot of information about what he was up to during that time. You'll see two of his influences, Algernon Sidney and John Locke, and his thoughts on government. The part that I like is government, if free to the people under it, whatever be the frame, where the laws rule and the people are party to those laws. More than this is tyranny, oligarchy, or confusion. He really starts to think about the populace having a say-so, which was part of this Enlightenment thinking that he had been exposed to, but not many people were doing this. Who gets to vote? You had to be 21 and own 50 acres. Ladies, you didn't have the right to vote quite yet. And the name Commonwealth for Pennsylvania comes from England, the Commonwealth period, which was the period underneath Oliver Cromwell. So England was known as a Commonwealth at that point, and you will find the Commonwealth of Virginia, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, a couple other colonies using the Commonwealth term, and it's stuck. Well, Penn's cousin arrives, goes down to call on the southern neighbors. The hereditary title of the Calverts is the Lord Baltimore. Penn's cousin gets nowhere. Penn decides, I'm going to go down and I'm going to speak to the Lord Baltimore, because Penn's deed, if you will, the Charter to Pennsylvania, does not establish a southern boundary. It establishes a western boundary, those 4 longitudinal lines, but it never codified the southern boundary. The Calvert claim is very clear. It goes up to the 40th parallel. Penn arrives and proudly tells the Lord Baltimore the 40th parallel runs through modern-day Baltimore. And those two chose to disagree for the rest of their lives. And I always tease people that if William Penn had spontaneously combusted, the Lord Baltimore wouldn't have tinkled on him. It will be 3 generations of both families that fight over this until the mid-1750s, when the King of England at that point is so fed up with hearing from both the Penns and the Calverts that he says, I just hired 2 surveyors. One is named Mason and one's named Dixon. I'm sending them from England. They're going to shoot a line and you people are going to shut up and live with it. The truth of the matter is the 40th parallel is about the siting of the Pennsylvania Turnpike. So Pennsylvania made out on this deal. Penn has to return to England because of that boundary dispute. The Lord Baltimore rushes back to England to plead his case to the crown. Penn has to go, and if you're going to be a successful colonial governor, you have to play court games. So Penn rushes back. He pleads his case. The king actually sides with him, but still does not establish that southern boundary. He gives Penn oversight of the lower counties, which today we would know as Delaware. So at this point, William Penn has his hand in what we would know as 3 states. I guess technically, if we grab land from Maryland, he has his hand in 4 states, but it really was never the state. He continues to have financial difficulties. He is a voracious corresponder, so there's a lot of letters that as historians we can draw from. He's engendered in James's court, and again, that's why he was jailed and suspected of treason. He loses his beloved first wife in 1694. 4 of their 7 children have died. 1 was stillborn. Remember, we had said there were 8 earlier on. But a daughter and a son, well, 2 sons are surviving. Shortly after losing his wife, he goes into mourning for better part of 2 years. But then he starts to court this woman who is half his age. Remember Thomas Callowhill? His daughter, that first investor, Hannah, who at age 25 is obviously an old maid and a spinster. I mean, who, yeah. She is one of 8 children, the only one that survived to adulthood. Her father is a fabulously wealthy linen merchant in the town of Bristol, England. She has been a Quaker all her life. She's a birthright Quaker. And as Penn corresponds with her, she blows him off. So the letters from Penn get more and more desperate. Hey, I've written to you 3 times. Why don't you get back? Fortunately, a third party intervenes. His daughter from the first marriage, Letitia, who at this point is only 6 years junior to her future stepmother. Hey, take a second look at Dad. He's pretty okay. And between those two, they wear down Hannah. She weds William in 1696. But there's another blow to Penn shortly thereafter. He loses his firstborn son from the first marriage, Springett. That was the maiden name of Gulielma, Springett. Springett has made it into his early 20s. Dad has invested all of his plans for Springett taking over the family business, becoming a colonial governor, and so on, and he is crestfallen. Hannah helps pick him up. They have a very loving marriage, and I always think of the union of William and Hannah as a power couple. Penn is brilliant with the big picture, but the devil's in the details. This woman has all the ability with the details. She was given the business sense from her father. She was active in the business, and for every bit of a boob that Penn was in financial management, she is brilliant. 1699, they have to return to Pennsylvania. There's unrest. The populace wants a better frame of government. They want more of a say-so. Penn's advance band, Captain Markham, has been giving concessions that he's not allowed to, some of them in direct conflict to English law or the law of the crown. It's a mess. So Penn decides, I'm going to go and I'm going to straighten stuff out. They sail across the Atlantic in the ship the Canterbury. On board their ship is James Logan, his future secretary, who's in his late teens at this point. There's a sail on the horizon, and there's a fear of pirates. Penn takes his wife and kids below deck. James Logan mans one of the guns and prepares for battle. But fortunately, it's an English merchant ship, so it's a false alarm. Penn takes Logan aside, says, dude, you're a Quaker. You're not supposed to be on the cannon. Coming from the same guy that beat up the English soldier. But ultimately, they will make their way into Upland, which we would know as Chester. It is late fall. Hannah is extremely pregnant for this sea voyage. Penn will rent a house in Philadelphia called the Slate Roof House. His home in the New World is Pennsbury, but the physicians are in Philadelphia and the political unrest is in Philadelphia. John the American will be born, the firstborn son of this union. He'll work on this governmental stuff. He sits down with everyone and says, dudes, I got it right the first time. And everyone's like, no, Bill, you didn't. And somewhat grudgingly, he works on what's called the Charter of Privileges. The Charter of Privileges will have the Assembly have 2 parts to it, kind of like Senate and House. It will have a judicial system that establishes rights of jury and trial by jury. And I think most important for all of us, it gives the common man the right to vote. He's eradicated the landholding part. Did anyone see the Ken Burns Revolutionary War series? So there's an episode when they are talking about the Declaration, and there's one line in it where it says the Pennsylvania legislature was meeting upstairs simultaneously to do a new constitution for Pennsylvania. And they were the first to give the common man the right to vote. And I, of course, am sitting there because I got to go to a preview at Washington's Crossing and thinking, The common man had the right to vote for 75 years before that, thanks to William Penn. And today, we all enjoy that as citizens. So, 1701, he has to rush back to England. Why? Two things. He had this creditor named Philip Ford. He's a subordinate and has lent Penn money. Penn, when he is jailed for treason, mortgages Pennsylvania to Ford. Part of the logic of this is to protect the colony. If he is found guilty of treason and beheaded, the colony goes away. If it's in somebody else's hand, it's protected with the understanding it'll revert back to the Penn family, the survivors. Penn needs more money after he gets out of jail, so he borrows more money. Ford puts further restrictions on this deed. In 1701, Ford's calling in the chit. He wants his money back. What had been agreed to was Penn was going to give him land, not cash. And Parliament is now looking at eradicating family-owned colonies. So Penn has to rush back and plead his case. There's a son that has survived from the first marriage, Billy, William Penn III. To say the apple fell far from the tree, that apple fell into another orchard. This kid is drunk and disorderly. He has renounced Quakerism. He abandons his wife and child, gets into ugly battles with his stepmother, and it's just not a good family dynamic. When he abandons his family, it is Hannah who takes them in and cares for them. By 1709, Philip Ford has died. Penn has to settle up with the widow, but he doesn't have the liquid cash to do it. He's the largest single landholder in England, but he doesn't have the cash, so he's thrown into debtor's prison. Wealthy Quakers pay off his debt and get him out of prison. 1712, he's desperate. For a year, he's turned to Queen Anne. Anne, have I got a deal for you? For the low purchase price of 16,000 pounds sterling, you can have a fully developed colony. Anne, of course, says, nah, I already got a couple royal colonies. The next year, in desperation, he drops the purchase price to 12,000 pounds sterling, which is just a little bit more than the initial money his daddy had laid out for that campaign. That was 11,000 pounds sterling. Anne accepts, but the Penns have to rush to Bristol because Thomas Callaghill has passed. The executrix is Hannah. And this speaks volumes to me in reading between the lines. Normally, the son-in-law, the male, would be the person handling the estate. Thomas Callaghill did not trust William Penn with the purse strings. He's seen Penn hemorrhage money time after time. So Hannah is settling this. They're on their way back when Penn is seized by a stroke. Billy contests the land sale to the crown. Queen Anne looks at this ugly fight going on in the family. William is debilitated. Hannah's dealing with the mourning, the estate of her father, and this, crazed stepson. And Queen Anne backs out. So Hannah accepts this great big old poop sandwich that is Pennsylvania at this point, and she starts to unravel it. She writes to James Logan over here, and they had established a lifelong friendship on that sea voyage on the Canterbury in 1699. Logan writes back, I was fed up with your husband. He's a great big picture guy, but everything else is messed up. But for you, my friend, I will hang in there. And Hannah actually starts to unravel these things. Penn will linger. He'll have 5 strokes. Ultimately, he will pass in 1718. Before hopping on the road this morning, I was in correspondence with our curator, and we are borrowing a matron's robe, a reproduction from a Lenape tribal member, a Delaware tribal member that she made. It's on exhibit at the Met right now. Hannah Penn writes to Logan that the Lenape had sent a fur robe lined with feathers. And I'm very friendly with some of these Delaware tribal members, and they're like, no, it's a feather robe lined with fur. The feathers are on the outside because feathers shed the water. But it was to comfort Hannah in her mourning. And this artist has reproduced it. Hannah will run the colony for the next 8 years. She was really running it from the point that Penn was debilitated by the first stroke. She is never granted the title governor or governess or proprietrix, but in function, she was calling the shots. And Billy will die shortly after Dad. Hannah will have to then fight with Billy's heirs over the distribution of Pennsylvania. Penn's will maintained that Hannah and the sons from that marriage would get Pennsylvania. Billy and his heirs would get the estates in Ireland. If Billy had a modicum of sense, he would have taken the estates in Ireland and run, because Pennsylvania was challenging. And ultimately, Hannah holding it together, straightening out at least a ceasefire and a kind of cease and desist over the border, was a huge step and something that her husband couldn't do. If you want to know why he was a business failure in Pennsylvania, the idea was, as landholders, you would have to pay quit rent. Quit rent, think of it as taxes, but you also owe homage to the feudal landlord. You want a great tax dodge? I'm not sure whose colony I'm living in, Pennsylvania or Maryland. You guys straighten it out and we'll settle up after that. So his business model was a failure. However, his political model was a success. And when they were looking for best examples and practices, they turned to Penn's Charter of Privileges. 50 years after it becomes the law, a bell is cast to hang in the Pennsylvania State House in honor of Penn's laws. It's famous because it has a crack in it, and nobody remembers that the Liberty Bell was cast in honor of Penn's governmental work. Today, we all enjoy his legacy as Americans. We have freedom of religion. We have a judicial system. We have a two-party system with a chief executive on top. We have rights of jury and trial by jury, and we can choose how we wish to worship. With that, I'm hoping I ran out of stuff. There we go. He gave a lot to religion. He gave a lot to politics and in literature. If you want kind of Penn light reading, but stuff from his hand, look up some Fruits of Solitude. These are his life axioms, and they're usually one-line or two-line things, so I always say it's bathroom reading. You could have it on the back of the commode along with the TP. But it does everything from family life to governmental life. The city of Philadelphia, how it was laid out, was his planning. It's influenced by his life experiences in London with the Great Plague and the fire. And today you can still follow that street plan that he laid out so long ago. He invited many diverse people. And one of the beauties of Pennsylvania, I think, is the richness of diversity of the people that we have here. In Philadelphia, there's Old Swedes Church. The mothership of all AME churches is Mother Bethel. In his city, it developed. There are active Schwenkfelder congregations down near where I'm at, and a great museum outside of Quakertown, the Schwenkfelder Museum. He brokered peace with the Lenape. Sadly, the promises were not kept. They were broken. And ultimately, the Lenape some of them, now called Delaware, will side with the French in the French and Indian War because of the walking purchase, and the English allowed that to happen. At the end of the French and Indian War, one of Penn's grandsons will have to pay reparations to the Delaware. But if you've been displaced for 25 years, cash payment doesn't make up for it. And sadly, those Lenape people, we can document indigenous people at least 15,000 years in this area. So to lose connection to your homeland, there is no price for that. We talked about his contributions to the Constitution. And I think I have hit the end of Penn's contributions. So with that said, I'd love to do some Q&A if I didn't make anything clear. Any questions, guys?
Was Hannah in Pennsylvania after William Penn died and managing it from here?
No, she was managing it from England. And if you actually look at Penn's trajectory, he's only here less than 4 years, 1682 to 1684, and then 1699 to 1701. Most colonial governors of a proprietary colony weren't in residence here. They were back because, again, to be successful, you have to play those court games. And Hannah, when Penn says, and in 1701, listen, Philip Ford is calling in the chit. I need to go settle with the creditors. Oh, and I got to talk to Parliament about taking away the colony. I'll be back in 5 months. And Hannah and Letitia are like, do not leave us in this godforsaken wilderness. We're going to come along with you. And it's fortuitous because Penn never does get to return. So, and Hannah will never return either. And you had a question, Miss?
Yeah, when George Fox and Penn were in Germany, they did a lot of recruiting for
Yes.
the colony. And did they document an area or areas of Germany that they got a lot of
Well, that
people who came from those areas?
I think the biggest.
I'm thinking a lot of Hanover. Did they get people from Hanover? Because that had a big relationship with Germany, of course, later.
Yeah, and you know, one of the things to keep in mind for all of us is Germany was not Germany at that point. They were all these little states and duchies and so on. So we're actually talking kind of a language region. So the Palatate, the Rhine Valley had been ravaged by wars prior to this time. And you have people moving in, a lot of Swiss move in there because the population, the German population was eradicated. And they weren't getting along with their neighbors because they were Mennonites and so on. But really the Palatate, the Rhine Valley was where we think a lot of it was. But, you know, they were traveling wherever they could get an audience. And past that, Penn is pamphleting for his colony. The thing is, for Fox and Penn, that trip was about converting people to Quakerism. And at that point for Quakers, if I am George Fox, my understanding is every one of your souls is in jeopardy if you don't find the inner light. The term Quaker was not used in a kind way at that time. They were actually the Society of Friends, and many of the original 60, think of these like the 12 apostles. Fox will have 60 first-generation Quakers who go out and start to proselytize. And they will go into active church services. So imagine, you know, I was raised Lutheran. So I'm in my Lutheran service, and next thing I know, the guy in front of me stands up and begins to proselytize, and he's so seized by his faith that he's shaking. And in a derogatory way, the English start to call these people Quakers. It was never meant to be complimentary. And one of the things I love about the faith is they've kind of turned it on its head. A quick Penn story, the Lenape call him Brother Onus. In the Lenape language, Onus means feather. So they're goofing on the guy for always having a quill pen, and he embraced it. On my first trip to Oklahoma to meet with tribal members in Bartlesville and Anadarko, which are where their two headquarters are, some of the people still remembered the name Brother Onus and used that name. But I loved the way that Penn had embraced that, similar to how the Quaker faith embraced, or the Society of Friends, I should say, embraced the name Quaker. So, lengthy explanation for a fairly simple question. I apologize. Other questions? Yes, sir.
I know it's a long story, but
Yeah.
the Anabaptists, which I'm learning about this, I lived in Philadelphia, came out here. They must have had some union together, they were pacifists and they didn't believe in taking oaths. But beyond that,
Yeah.
were they trying to convert each other too? The Mennonites and Quakers?
Yeah.
I mean, they were on good terms.
They were on good terms, but, you know, and that's one of the things about that time during the 17th century is you've got all these different religions all vying for numbers. And sometimes, and when I say in conflict, it's not as in physical conflict, but a spiritual and theological conflict, and trying to convince you that my religion is best, you know, and the true way to God is through me. Then you've got those long-standing organized religions, such as the Catholics, and like I said, I was raised Lutheran, which I always tease, you know, people at my church. A Lutheran is just a Catholic who can't remember all the saints. And Martin Luther was Catholic, and he remained Catholic throughout his life. So, but those organized religions had a very firm hand on the life of individuals. And there was money at stake too, because they were collecting funds and so on. So anyone who is developing a religion that is bypassing that was frowned upon. And Fox and Penn, of course, were frowned upon. For Charles I, when he's lining up the charter for Pennsylvania, and James is very active in this, and I should have pointed out, the land that Penn is granted actually belonged to James, not to the king. So during the negotiations, the older brother says to the kid brother, well, how do you feel about this? And James says, well, I kind of like this idea of this Newcastle place. I may never go there, but give me 12 miles around Newcastle. Have you ever looked at the map of Pennsylvania and seen that semicircular part down in the corner? It's because James wanted a 12-mile circumference around Newcastle to be protected. And that's what that thing is. And that was actually measured off by Mason and Dixon, as well as that straight line that goes down the side of Delaware. They didn't just go across the southern tier. So,
Thank you.
oh, very welcome.
I think Steve Nolt is coming up as
Yes,
a speaker.
yes.
And
Uh-huh.
if you're here when Steve Nolt is here, who's an expert in Anabaptism and pietist, ask that same question.
I know, it gets complicated.
It is very complicated, and it was a complicated time. You know, today we all look back, and I had a grandmother who I adored, and when I recognized that my grandmother, who was born in the 1890s, was mortal and wouldn't be with me forever, I would go and take lunch to her in Biglerville, Pennsylvania, just north of Gettysburg. And we'd have to put on Paul Harvey on the news, on the radio, the rest of the story. So we would go through this. She would start every conversation, this old world is changing. And I think we've all experienced it, and you guys will be saying this when you're my age about the changes. But times were complicated back then, too. And we tend to romanticize the past. And I work at a museum. Everyone says, wouldn't it be nice to live back then? I'm like, no, I like microwave popcorn. I like indoor plumbing, you know. It's just different. And when we talk about these historical figures, it's not us in funny clothing. Our worldview is different because our life experiences are different. Living through the plague, living through the fire, having seen combat influenced Penn, and being raised by a huge hero. I mean, when you talk William Penn in England, it ain't our guy, it's the Admiral. And a larger than life character who had really risen by his own prowess. So as we look at these historical figures, we should all, you know, give them a little bit of slack because they're products of their time and their life experiences. Any other questions? Yeah.
I was just
Sure.
wondering how his son Billy died. He must have been fairly young.
By the time Billy dies, he's about 40, but it was we say consumption. And that tends to be a catch-all. Could it have been cancer? Could it have been disease? Could it have been alcoholism? We know that he had trouble with alcohol. We really don't know. And same for Springett. It was consumption for Springett, who again, died in his early 20s.
Well, thank you very much. I met Doug. What seminar was that with the library or the writing project in Philadelphia, right?
Yep.
So there's folks from the Library of Congress and teachers in the area that have this writing project. I don't really know the thing, and so that was back in the fall.
Yes,
I
it
think.
was.
Yes.
Pennsbury.
And but not only did I enjoy meeting Doug, I also enjoyed Pennsbury Manor. So if you haven't been there, it's just there. It's upside down. It's really beautiful, and what a spot that he found to settle.
At its heyday, it was only 6,000 acres. However, Penn will write during his final visit to a friend that he only had 40 of it cleared. So the historic site today is 43 acres, about 20 buildings. We keep livestock, we have period gardens with heirloom plants in them, and our niche market are fourth graders. So starting last week, they started to show up, and as of next week, every day is booked that we take schools to the middle of June. And it's a great audience. We have so much fun with them.
And whose birthday is coming up at Pennsbury?
So on Saturday, we are celebrating a 1-year birthday for Daphne. Daphne is a Hereford heifer. She's a miniature. The variety, the Herefords, were beef cattle. We keep the livestock, we don't butcher them. But as a miniature, it's more accurate to the size cattle were back then. We look at a Hereford today and there's 300 years of genetic manipulation and breeding to get them to be, the steaks that we eat. But Daphne, yes, we're gonna have a party for Daphne. There'll be cupcakes, there'll be kids' games, songs, etc. And it's, one of the great joys at the site is the animal husbandry program, but every day is different. We adopt horses from the American Standard Bred Rescue, so we give homes to horses that need a home. And we are very selective because our audience, especially kids, may not know what to be afraid of, and a horse can hurt you. So we need a very steady horse. And the same with Daphne. She's halter trained, so we can walk her on a halter around and so on. She's not going to kick people. She's not going to gore you with her horns, which are about this long right now. But if you get a chance, every Sunday there's programs that are value added. One Sunday a month is open hearth cooking, if you're interested in that. One Sunday is period trades, blacksmithing, woodworking, wool production. One Sunday is role play. This is where our volunteers don the period costume and reenact things. My favorite is the witch trial. William Penn actually presided over a witch trial. In Pennsylvania. Because if your cow is not giving milk, it's obvious somebody put a hex on it. I mean, that's just good science. And that was in the case. And if you show up, you can find out whether Margaret Matson is a witch or not. And then the final Sunday is garden highlights in period brewing. William Penn had his own brew house. At the end of April, we are premiering a Guliana Penn beer because Guli left her family recipes that include a beer recipe. And for my front row, how many of you had a big old frosty beer for breakfast? There you go. Actually, in William Penn's time, beer was a kid's drink too. But you would dip your tea bag, like dipping a tea bag, you'd reuse the ingredients 3 times. So they had a variety of beer called small beer, which kind of is for small people. it almost has no alcohol in it. So it just keeps you hydrated.
Well, thank you.
Yep.
And Doug just did bring pamphlets, so they're over there on the table if you want that. I especially think, I want to see if I make that May 3rd one. That's with the
Yeah.
Lenape, right?
Right. So on May 3rd, again, we'll have Delaware tribal members. And as the Lenape are pushed away from the river and their homeland, which they would have called Lenape Hoken, people start to refer to them as those people that lived along the Delaware, and the name sticks. And it's kind of ironic because Delaware is not a native term.
No. Delaware. French.
3rd Earl Delaware, who is the governor of Virginia at the time, and he has hired an explorer to map the coast. And the Chesapeake's already named, so the next thing you do is name it after your benefactor.
Just fascinating. I could stand here for an hour listening to another hour. Also, we put this out. A lot of you got it in the mail, but it's a list of all our other speakers for Wednesday afternoon, Spotted Tea in History. So again, Doug, I can't thank you enough. It's a long drive up. How long did it take you?
It took about an hour and 45 minutes.
Oh.
Yeah.
So we sure do appreciate
You're very
your
welcome.
coming. And,
Very welcome.
how about another round of applause? Thank you for sharing your afternoon with us.
Yeah.
And please come back and please help yourself to food, because after every meal I say, I have to take it home and give it to my husband. And he doesn't need it.